Welcome to the Lost Sheep Found podcast. I'm your host, Carrie, and this week's episode's a little different as it was submitted to us via a voice memo. This person did such an amazing job of recording her story that after listening, Brandy and I discussed it, and after discussing it with the person that submitted it, we all were in agreement that we're going to publish it as it is, minus a little bit of editing. But here it is. It's her story. Another cool thing about this is that we did meet with the person that submitted the story, and we did record a Q&A section, and that's going to be published next week, where we kind of go into a little bit more detail about her journey as a lost sheep found. I also want you to take note of when she tells her story, she's trying to work through it in her head and hemming and hawing and afraid people will judge her. And trust me, we told her she could be anonymous. We would change names. We would delete out things. Anything she wanted to delete out, we would delete out. But in the end, she was like, no, if this helps one person, it's totally worth it. And she wants to be transparent. So if you're that one person, you can thank Susan. We hope you enjoy her story.
Don't turn away, Lord, hear my cries.
This is a rough draft of my story because I wouldn't know where to begin. But I think that if I wanted to make it public, I would want people to be blessed by it, and I don't want to be afraid to share it. My fear is that just your personal life being out there in public, you don't know how people could use it against you. Also, I don't know if I'm sure that I would want my daughter to know it or hear it all. I'm not sure. Another fear that I have is that it would hurt my mother. We are still not on speaking terms as of today, and I don't know if she realizes the immense damage that her actions have caused me, and I don't know if in hearing my story she would understand it or agree with it, or maybe just become angry, or I don't know. I don't know how to put that in my head. But nevertheless, I want to put it at least in this recording so that I can start gathering those thoughts together in a constructive, healing way.
Give me for the trespass. Can't you see?
So my story begins when my mother had me 2 days before she turned 18. From what I heard from my family, my mother was not able to take care of me. She was still in the friend party life. And so she left me with my grandmother, who was in her 50s at that time. And my two youngest aunt and uncle were still living with my grandmother. So that's where I lived. And I don't have any memories, hardly any memories of my mother. My first memories are of my grandmother and the apartment that we lived in when I was having those first memories. I remember my grandfather, even though they weren't together, but I think he still visited from time to time. I definitely remember my Aunt Carmen and my Uncle Johnny, especially my Uncle Johnny, because he is just a character and he was only 10 years older than me. So I knew that I loved my mother and that I wanted to be with her, but I was too little to understand it. I just hoped that maybe she would take me with her one day. I remember one time when I was about 8 years old, that my mother came over to visit with my Uncle Johnny. I remember her visits were very brief, and I don't remember really being about me. Like, she didn't stop and talk to me or spend time with me or take me out or anything like that. I just remember them being brief, and she would leave with my Uncle Johnny, or I don't know. But this one time, I wanted her so badly, and I ran after her as she was leaving. And I cried so deeply that my face turned purple, and my face just froze, and no sound was coming out of my opened mouth. I was just frozen, and I couldn't breathe, and it was like a desperate, don't leave me, I want you. And she turned back and just kind of looked at me and kind of chuckled a little bit, because I guess I looked funny. And she just came and briefly comforted me and sent me back inside. I remember a gift she got me when I was maybe, again, around that time. She had, at this time, had a boyfriend that was wealthy. He actually won the lottery while they were dating. Won millions of dollars, and so she was on vacation, and when she came back, she gave me this little stuffed animal that was a gorilla, and holding a little sign that said, "Para ti, Susi, por ser lo mejor de mi vida," which translates to, "For you, Susie, for being the best thing in my life." And I really loved that thing. I kept it. I still have it, actually. It meant so much to me that my mother would gift me something like that. When I was 9 years old, my mother had decided that she wanted her children, because by this time she had me, my sister, my brother. She wanted us to move in with her, and she had asked her boyfriend to let us move in. And I don't know what happened, but I just know that I was the only one that was able to move in with her at that time. And so they had this big house, and I had my own bedroom, and I was so happy. I was in this new place, in this big house with a swimming pool, with my mom. By then, my mom had a child with this boyfriend, so I had a little brother, besides the other two siblings that I had with my grandmother. And my mom's boyfriend would always take us out to parties, every weekend, to his friends' parties, or I remember him taking us to like the zoo or to Mexico sometimes for vacationing. I think I don't know, but my memory can be kind of bad sometimes. But I was having fun. The bad thing is that this man was the first person that abused me sexually. Actually, maybe the second, because the first one was probably at one of my mom's friends' homes, but that's like going backwards. Anyway, so this man would molest me as much as he could. He wasn't home very often because his job, by this time he was like semi-famous, doing like Mexican cowboy movies and hanging out with Mexican celebrities and stuff. So he traveled a lot, thankfully. But when he was home, he would abuse me, and it was a dark time in my life. So I had my own bedroom, and I was sleeping one day, and I remember waking up one morning, and it was very bright in my bedroom, like it normally was when I woke up, and the sun was shining right into my bedroom. And this morning it was particularly bright, and I remember squinting and opening my eyes, and I saw a man standing in my bedroom, and he was so beautiful. His arms were outstretched. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, white robe, and he was just looking at me, expressionless. And I couldn't make anything out of it. I was just a kid, and I was just staring at this beautiful man looking at me. And I remember just looking and falling asleep at the same time. I don't know how long I had been looking, but I fell asleep. And then I remember waking up and just feeling like, wow, that really happened. Like, I saw that person, that man. But I didn't know what to make of it. I wasn't religious. I wasn't going to church or anything like that, so I didn't know anything at that time. So I never told anybody about that. My life went on, and I remember then this man leaving my mom eventually because my mom started going to a Christian church, and so this man didn't want anything to do with it, so he left my mom. And by this time she had all her children with her living there in that house, giant house. But my mom wasn't working. She didn't have a degree or anything like that, so it was so hard for us. Left her alone with 5 kids, and the youngest was like under a year old. So my mom had to go back to work, and she had to have roommates move in so that, to help her pay the rent and all of that. During this time, I was just trying to survive with being the oldest sibling and trying to help my mom. My mom turned very anxious. She turned very mean toward us, very unhappy. Before this, she was beginning to be like a homemaker. I remember she was beginning to make her own curtains, and she was good at sewing and make her own tablecloths, and she would love interior design. So she was just starting to be a good homemaker with, this wealthy lifestyle with this man. But when he left, it completely shattered her, and she just turned, even though she was walking with the Lord or accepted the Lord, she just became like a monster. She would abuse me physically, and she would abuse my siblings physically. She was an emotional wreck all the time. She just would make us do things that were just super strict. Like, at one point, I remember she would make us eat our meals because we didn't have a lot of food or anything. She would want to make sure that we ate food, and so that we wouldn't be filled, she would make us eat all of our food with 5 tortillas each. I mean, from the oldest to the youngest, 5 tortillas each, because tortillas are filling. So 5 tortillas each. We couldn't drink water before or during the meal so that we wouldn't get filled on fluids. And we had to eat everything in 5 minutes. And if we didn't finish our food within 5 minutes, she would spank us 5 times with a rod. So it was pretty crazy stuff. I remember she would just, when I was turned teenager, there was this man that was after me from our church. So I was like 13, and he was 7 years older than me, so he was 20. And he was super handsome and playful and fun, and he started coming around our home. My mom, by this time we had roommates from church, and she loved hanging out with the youth from church. She's, she never grew out of her youth mentality even till today. She loved having youth around, and I remember we would have sleepovers and pool parties and stuff like that. Just fun for me. I mean, I was a teenager hanging out with all these, older teens, young 20s, and it was cool. And this handsome man was, interested in me. But the sucky thing is that my mom was interested in him. And if you think about it, he was 7 years older than me, but 10 years younger than my mom, 10, 11. So, and with her young mentality, it became a problem for us because she kept him around because she thought he was interested in her, but he was really interested in me. And I know this because the roommate at that time, my mom's girlfriend, told me all this. The roommate kind of became, like a double agent. So she would kind of, hear my mom out, but then she would also hear me out and like tell me things. It was weird, but so then this guy eventually confessed to my mom that he was interested in me and that he eventually wanted, to marry me in the future, which if I think of it now, is so creepy because I was like I was still like around 15 by the time this came out, and my mom kept him around for some reason. I'm not sure why. Thankfully, nothing ever happened sexually between him and I, but I did fall in love with him, and he became like a big brother to me. He showed me a lot of things like rollerblading, and he was swimming, and he was just a great person. Well, kind of, because he ended up being a crazy person. But anyway, so my mother was like an enemy to me. Not that to me she was an enemy, but I was an enemy to her because she saw me as a threat from then on. She would treat me worse, and she would always act like super extra strict toward me. And at first I thought it was because of the religion and the church, and that's what they were teaching her to do. But now I know it's also because she just had this weird notion, these fears. I don't know what it was, but she would be very strict and not hardly let me do anything, which in hindsight is probably a good thing. She just I knew she hated me when she would beat me, and I would feel that rage and that hatred. She would say very hurtful things. By this time, we had moved to a different house. We had to downsize. We had to move to a different house, and my mom still had roommates, and she had let this 22-year-old man move in with his sister that was already living with us for a while. The sister had also sexually abused me when I was around 15, 16 years old. I mean, my mom just pretty much let random people in our home. I mean, they were from church, but some of them were like new Christians. Some of them had just crossed the border from Mexico, so they were dealing with their demons too. And so this girl had sexually molested me, and I just did nothing with it. I never told anybody, and it was only like a 1 or 2 time thing. So I just let it pass, and she changed in my eyes, so I just never said anything. But she lived with us for at least a few years, and then eventually her brother moved in, crossed the border from Mexico, moved in, and he was 22 and I was 17, and so I was sexually ready to explore, and so I had sex with him. He was actually married. He was separated from his wife, who still lived in Mexico, and he had at least a couple children. At 22, I know, so young, but it was my understanding that they were separated. At least that's what he convinced me of. He reassured me that I wouldn't get pregnant, that he knew how to take care of me, and that we would be okay. And so I gave my virginity to him, and shortly after that day, he and his sister moved out because I think they got into an argument with my mom. Something happened where they just moved out right away. I still went over to see him when he got he and his sister rented a new bedroom at someone's house, and I would sneak instead of going to school, I would go and see him, because at this time it was a summertime and I was going to one summer class, but I had dropped out without telling my mom, and I was really going to see him. So I went to see him and was, doing what I was doing. And I had left my jewelry in his bedroom. And of course, his sister finds it because, they share a bedroom. They're renting a bedroom together. And she takes it to my church and speaks to the pastors or elders about it. And the day that the elders called me into this room to tell me about this and, have me confess or whatever, that very day I had already made up my mind that I was going to confess to the leaders because I was miserable. I had loved this church. This church was my refuge, as weird as it was and as full of legalism. I had loved this church, and we went to this church like at least 3 times a week. I mean, their services ran from Friday to Sunday, and the services were at least 3 hours long. So I was there a lot. And then Tuesdays we had Bible studies. So that was a lot of church in 1 week, but I grew to love a lot of these people, and a lot of them were my friends. And so I was ready to confess after like a week of having sex with this guy. And that's the day that they called me into this room, and they asked me, started interrogating me. I don't remember the exact things that we said, but I remember telling them. And I remember them just being in shock and like just didn't know what else to say. They called in a sister because it was just 2 men interviewing me, and they called in a sister to come. And so she kind of was there with us at the tail end of that conversation. And they had reassured me that nobody was going to know, this was going to stay with us, and we were going to, figure out how to talk to, about it, and just that I was safe and all of that. Well, I wasn't, because that very night, my mom was talking to the pastors and probably the same leaders that talked to me. And my mom was livid. This was already at night, because our services ran like in the evening from I think it was 6 to 9 or something. And it was already after church, and it was already late. So by the time my mom had her conversations and I had my conversations with the leadership, it was already close to midnight. And so I just remember my mom being livid and gathering all her children into her vehicle and driving us home. And I was like, crap, she knows. And she knew, because she couldn't hold it in. We only had a 5-minute drive to our house, and still she just couldn't hold it in. And she was already just cursing at me and trying to hit me from the driver's seat. She made all the kids go to bed except for my 13-year-old brother. She had him help her and called me into a bedroom. And she started just accusing me and yelling at me and hitting me, and I was on the floor. And the reason why my 13-year-old brother was there was because she wanted him to hold me while she beat me up. And so she had him hold me while I was on the floor, and he was trying to pin me down. I came out with a black eye, and she had called my uncle from the same uncle that I grew up with, my Uncle Johnny. At this point, he was living in Mission Viejo with his wife and 2 young children. And she called him to come pick me up, that she couldn't stand me anymore, and that he had to come and just take me away. I just missed my siblings. I was like their second mama, and I missed them so much. And when I tried calling home, my mom would hang up on me, or eventually my sister would hang up on me too. And I couldn't talk. I just wanted to talk to my youngest brother. He was 7 at that time. And I just wanted to hear his voice. And I was completely just expelled from my home and my church. It was so painful. So painful. To top it all, I had to start school the next month. And I was going to be a senior. It was going to be a whole new school. I didn't know anybody, but that's where I met my husband. So I meet my husband. He was so funny. I was first attracted to him because I remember we had 2 classes together, English class and basketball class. Our English class was in the morning, and he would come in, and he was always late. And he would come in like with a posse. It was so popular. He would just come in just laughing and smiling and just so radiant, and I was just so attracted to that because, at home I had been very sad all the time. My mom was always angry and stressed, and our home life was always stressed. And Joseph, my husband, was the light. He was the sun. He was consistently happy all the time, smiling, cracking jokes, even at the teacher. Like, the teacher would even smile at him and laugh at him and stuff. And I just really liked that kid a lot from the beginning. And he fell in love with me. I say that he fell in love with me because I wasn't really attracted to him. I loved the person that he was, and I felt safe with him, but I didn't see myself dating him. He was a different culture. I had never dated anybody different culture than me. He was Asian, and, I'm Hispanic, and I don't know. I never thought of it, But he fell in love with me first, and he won me over. He was so sweet and so different than anything I had ever known. He was so gentlemanly. He would buy me cute gifts, and such a precious person to me. So we fell in love, and I wasn't a virgin, but he was. And, then he was curious about sex. And so I was more of the expert, quote unquote expert, even though I hardly knew anything. So I was the naughty one, and I introduced him to sex. And eventually his parents found out because my sister took a picture of us one morning while we were asleep together. And I was so proud of it, and I gave it to him, and he took it home and he hid it in his jacket pocket, which we didn't know that his mom would check all his pockets, before doing laundry. So she found it. So we ended up running away together because his parents didn't really like me to begin with. I mean, just as much as I wasn't used to someone like Joseph, his family wasn't used to somebody like me, What they knew about me was probably bad. It was that I was living with my aunt and my uncle, that I didn't have a mom or a dad, because I never knew my dad. I was Hispanic, and, I'm sure they had their own ideas of people different from their culture. And so that's how they treated me, and I wasn't welcomed in their home. And so Joseph decided to choose me over them. And so we ran away. At this point, I had a job, and I had my car, so I figured, crap, his dad just kicked him out, and he chose me over staying, in his house. So now I have to take care of him. So with that big sister mentality, I just said, I have to take care of him, and I did. We were homeless for about a week and a half. This was our first semester in college by this time, and so we were homeless, sleeping like in random neighborhoods in my little tiny uncomfortable Honda Civic sports car. And eventually his mom went to my work where I worked, and she went for like a whole week trying to talk to me, and I would just kind of shoo her away and just not want to talk to her. And eventually I listened, and she said, hey, I convinced my husband to let you guys move in to live in Joseph's bedroom. And so I played it off cool, and I said, okay, well, if I ever see him, I'll tell him. And so, of course, I was ecstatic, and I told him right away, probably during my break. I said, hey, guess what? Your mom convinced her dad to let us move into your bedroom. And so we probably moved in within that week. We moved in that day, maybe even, who knows. But we moved in, and to me, I was in heaven, because I had never seen an intact family like that before. I had never seen a mom and a dad and all their kids living together in one lovely home. The dad would work, the mom would stay home and do all the cooking, cleaning, and watching the kids. And even the kids were kind to each other. So opposite of my home life. My home life was like super stressful, and all of us kids always fought and argued and, hit each other and all that stuff. And not here in his home. It was, all the siblings loved each other and played together, and you hardly ever heard them angry at each other or talk angry at each other. It was insane. I thought, wow, this is true family. This is like what it's supposed to be like. And so, and then they would have dinner together, every evening, everyone at the table together. And it was just, I was just in heaven. And they all of a sudden gave me a chance and, treated me 180 from what they were treating me before, and they were just catering to my everything. I remember them buying me my favorite foods, like I love Twinkies. They would buy me boxes of Twinkies. I liked olives. They would buy me olives. I liked orange soda, Crush, I think. They would buy me orange soda all the time. Just everything that I liked at that time, they would just buy it for me all the time and just try and include me as much as possible. But there was this thing that I didn't like, which was that they still kept in touch with Joseph's ex-girlfriend, because they had wanted them to end up together eventually. And she was, Asian like them, and they loved her, and blah, blah, blah. She probably came from a good family. I don't remember the details, but she would call like almost every day, and it was annoying because sometimes they would have Joseph talk to her, and I didn't like that. That wasn't right, and I hated that my husband by that time he was still just my boyfriend, but still that he was talking to his ex, and that my in-laws would keep in touch with her made me feel like they valued her more than they valued me. And so I started just feeling kind of like unwelcomed there. And we lived there for about a year when I remember just starting to feel more and more uneasy. And one of those things happened because one of my sisters-in-law, she was like probably 15 years old by this time, 16, 15, around there. And the parents had tried to set her up with a wealthy man to maybe date him and maybe eventually marry him. He was a dentist, and he was like 28 or something. And, they loved him because, he was Asian and he was wealthy, and they wanted their daughter to be well taken care of. And so he started coming around a lot to visit, but they for some reason, didn't want him to know about me. At this time, I was already married to Joseph, but they didn't want him to know that I lived there and that I was married. They didn't want him to know I existed. I would go to school, I would go to work after school, and then I would sit in my car after work until he left. And a lot of times he wouldn't leave until around 11. And I would just remember being in my car, cold, and having to wait, close to the house, watching to see when he would leave because I couldn't come inside. And that would just shatter me. I would just become more and more angry at this and like, what is happening? They just wanted this perfect facade that their family life was perfect, and somehow me being in it, it wasn't perfect. And somehow Joseph being married to me wasn't perfect. So I started, being super restless, and the family that I thought that was so perfect and beautiful was starting to shatter in my eyes, and I started turning to God. I remember, I was in my college, and I would go from class to class, and I remember that every now and then I would hear this verse in my head, this Bible verse. I hadn't been to church at this time for, at least a year. And this verse in my head was, "He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it." I think it's from like Hebrews 1:6, if I remember correctly. And I remember hearing it a few times. And now I know it was the Holy Spirit that was after me. My heart was becoming more and more restless. And I remember I was attracted to this group that would sit in the lawn there at Saddleback College. They would just sit in the lawn every day, and they would be singing worship music, and they would just sit and read the Bible. And I would walk by kind of looking, but kind of like, oh, these weirdos. But eventually I would stop a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then they would say, "Come and sit with us." And I finally did one day, and I sat there, and from then on I was just captivated, and they drew me in, and they welcomed me, and I would go to their Bible studies at their homes. They were young kids, and all these young kids would meet in a home. We'd do Bible studies, we'd do hiking sometimes, and that's where my love for Jesus started coming back, because of this group that I'm so grateful for. Eventually, I was more and more restless, but I didn't want to go back to church because, church had shunned me. They had rejected me. But in my heart of hearts, somehow, as a young woman, I just knew that Jesus wasn't like that. I knew that these people were like that. I knew that my mom, had been two-faced, one person at church, one person at home. But I knew that that wasn't Jesus. And so I told my husband, I said, "Look, honey," I said, "I need to go back to church. I'm just so restless. I need to get back with God. And I know that, you were raised Catholic, and even though you're not practicing right now, but you were raised in the Catholic Church, and I was raised in the Christian church. But so what I propose is that we go church hopping, and whatever church you choose, that's the one that I want, that we'll stay at, we'll be members of that church." He agreed. And so we did. We were church hopping, and the one that he chose, I was like, oh God, I hope he doesn't choose this one. Of course, that would happen, because like I said, I grew up in a super legalistic church. I mean, it was like, women don't wear pants, don't wear makeup, jewelry, blah, blah, blah. Super strict. But the church that he chose, it was a huge mega church. And I would see women in ripped, tight jeans and spaghetti straps, even some people smoking on campus. I would be like, what the? And then the worship, it had the smoke and the lights and, all that. So I was like, oh, this is not godly. And in my legalistic brain, I was just judging it. But I made a promise to my husband, so we ended up staying at this church for 4 years, and this is actually what I needed, because it took me from this, super strict church, the polar opposite, where it started to break that ice in my heart, and it started to crack it and just let grace in and just let hope in and just more freedom in Jesus and stuff like that. And so that's when I just started coming to Jesus. And now in retrospect, that story that I had said about Jesus, or that man in my bedroom, now I know it was Jesus, because I remember that had happened around when I was like 10 years old. But I was around 25 years old, so like 15 years later, I was working and I was listening to K-Wave, my favorite radio station, and they were talking about how a lot of Middle Easterns were coming to the Lord, that, you know, the Bible or Jesus wasn't allowed in their country, but that the Lord was giving people dreams and visions of a man in a white robe. And these people were coming to Jesus because they were wanting that person. They would say, you know, I want that man in the white robe. And when Christians would talk to them, they would tell them the man in the white robe. And so Christians would introduce them to Jesus. And so when I heard that, it took me back to my vision, and I knew that was Jesus, that he was in the white robe, and that he was with me in my darkest moments, that he was with me when I had been abandoned by my parents, living with my grandmother and my aunt and uncle, that he was with me the whole time, and that he was protecting me, you know, even though horrible things still happened, but he was still there, and he was still hurting with me and protecting me from worse things. And so I just never left him. I always just clung to him after that, and here I am now, still clinging to him and still growing. And he's answered so many prayers. There have been so many hardships, and I still don't talk to my mom. We're still not in speaking terms. I tried a few times in my adult life to become friends with her, but she has some things that she needs to take care of that she hasn't, and it keeps her from fully opening up to me and just fully becoming my friend at the very least. And so unfortunately we're not in speaking terms right now, and I don't feel it's gonna happen, but I'm still forgiving her, still forgiving everybody. And if my story can bless somebody, then it was worth being made known.
To make it well with my soul.
Thanks for joining us for the first part of Susan's story. Join us next week as we dive deeper with a Q&A section. Don't want to miss the episode? Subscribe on our website at lostsheepfoundpodcast.com or follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Amazon Music. Have a story to share? You can do what Susan did and share it via voice memo. You can email it to us at lostsheepfoundpodcast@gmail.com.
And the ice and snow melts away, when the tears we've cried have all run dry, and we find the rainbow's end, we'll be walking in the sunshine, walking in the sunshine, walking in the sunshine with him. Oh, mercy